Hey folks, welcome to another work from home episode of Long Shots, and I have with me Mr. Sharat Tupran. Hey man, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going same as usual. The lockdown's getting to me now. It's been well over a month, but I look forward to our podcast chats because you get to learn something, and time flies, and it's always very insightful. So I'm looking forward to today's chat as well.
I mean, I've noticed that earlier you used to say not too bad, but
I've evolved now.
Not
the new work for
not too bad is out of the window now, is it?
Yeah, now I'm doing pretty well. I'm being an optimist now.
Awesome. So as all our listeners already know, we've been covering COVID-19 pretty closely on the podcast, not because we really want to, but it's like the biggest elephant in the room, so there's no point of talking about anything else. It's kind of, it's affecting pretty much all parts of the economic and social value chain. So, but it's been quite exciting. We had Dr. Chopra recently, who spoke about the public health and medical side of things. And prior to that, we discussed a bit about the economy. We spoke about corporate governance. And today our guest is rather different. Very excited to have with us Astha Kapoor, who's the co-founder of Aapti Institute. Astha has worked extensively in areas of data governance and basic income. Obviously, Astha, through our extensive background research, we did end up listening to your last podcast. And from that, I discovered that you worked on India's only UBI pilot. So I'm gonna like literally copy paste that part of your intro here, and it's great to have you, Astha.
Hi guys, thank you so much for having me. I'm also like Sharat, not too bad, keeping it optimistic.
Perfect. In terms of Aapti Institute, obviously, it will be good to know a bit about that first. I think it's a good segue into the kind of work that you have been doing, and trust me, there are tons of questions. So why don't you kind of share a bit of a background about what you have been working on recently?
Right. So Aapti it means coming together, and it was started by my co-founder and I in the beginning of 2019, and the objective of our organization is to examine the issues of technology from the perspective of the lived experience. And we realized that there were a lot of people talking about technology in the spirit of building it and the efficiencies and drama it adds to everyone's lives, and also a lot of chatter about regulation and law, but not enough was being said about the impact of technology on the ground. How does it interface with the lived experiences of people? So that was the objective of Aapti. We work on the future of workers. We work on governance and citizenship, as well as on the data economy, trying to understand what the new commodification of data, what does that mean to our lives? So that's broadly it. And before Aapti, I worked extensively with the government through an organization called Microsave, where I was looking at direct benefits transfers, evaluating them, helping the government design them. I also worked at Dalberg, where we looked at the digitization of payments quite early, and now this was all in 2014-15, but which in the journey of financial inclusion in India seems like a lifetime away. And then even earlier than that, it was I was at the Planning Commission and also did the Universal Basic Income pilot, which was in 2010. And that's when we were, carrying bags of cash to people. Right. So India's financial inclusion landscape has really, really come a long way in about 10 years. And I think, I guess it's an interesting thing to constantly discuss because it's evolving so rapidly.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And before we sort of get into more specifics there, just how did you end up at what made you start something like this or co-found something like this? I think you've been trained in history, and then you did your master's as well in at Institute of Social Studies. How did sort of that evolve or lead into starting something like an Aapti Institute?
So, like I said, I've been examining this space of, digitization of payments and more specifically welfare. For a while, I worked with the government and I worked in consulting. So, I think, like I said, we started because we realized that this whole everybody's pretty gung-ho about technology and we don't problematize it enough. Like, we don't ask the questions of what does it do to the margins, how do vulnerable people navigate it? What does it mean for our rights? So APTI has been set up to ask some of those questions. Things that we thought that were missing almost entirely in the existing discourse, because it is being led quite a bit by technologists and also by lawyers. So where does the question of lived experiences and impact on people really come up? So that's the perspective that we're taking at APTI, and that's why we set it up.
Also bureaucrats.
I'm thankfully in Bangalore, so that perspective I don't get to see as much.
Right. So Astha, like, if we kind of can just zoom into recent events. Obviously, things like UBI, things like direct benefit transfer, they have been around for now close to half a decade, right? And especially post 2014, there was obviously a centralized push towards developing some kind of a back-end infrastructure for direct benefit to actually happen. And over the last 3 to 4 weeks, I guess that system got tested at a nationwide scale, right? I mean, if we look at the FM's so-called stimulus 1.0, where 1.7 lakh crores of relief was announced, constituting both cash and kind. The numbers themselves are astounding, right? Like 500 rupees per month to over 200 million women, 2,000 rupees to 87 million farmers. I'm sure you must be following this pretty closely. So, from the perspective of the back-end infrastructure in the form of Jandhan, in the form of Aadhaar as a universal identification, as well as obviously digital payments, do you how would you kind of rate, or how would you read the government's response to COVID and its efficiency and translation to the ground level? Or is it too early to actually comment on that?
So I think that first of all, the stimulus came a little bit later than it should have. I think that the crisis was made worse by the fact that the stimulus came 48 hours after the lockdown was announced.
Right.
So in terms of timing, I think that the government could have done much better to start rolling we knew that we were like we were in the middle of a train crash. So we could have done much better to reassure people much quicker and start to push out the stimulus sooner. I also think that there's a big question which I've talked to a lot of people about, especially those on the ground, is the 500 rupees per month for 3 months really sufficient?
Right.
And I did some work around this. I mean, not work, but I looked into like just minimum wages in cities like Delhi and Bombay, and even in like state capitals, it ranges anywhere between 300 to 450 rupees per day.
Right.
So what is the value of 500 rupees per month? Even for the most vulnerable, unskilled workers is something that I don't understand fully. So both in terms of timing and sufficiency of payment, I think that the government has faltered. In terms of the infrastructure, I have, in my experience, found that the digital infrastructure of India is insufficient, both because of, there's exclusion, that is, people don't have bank accounts. There is also exclusion because people who have bank accounts are unable to access them, because then that could be because of distance, that could be because of digital literacy, that could be also because of the digital infrastructure. Do you get signal? Do you get whatever, do you have a smartphone to be able to access? So transferring money digitally into the account to somebody who is unable to get to their bank right now, and even if they are able to get to their bank, are they able to access their bank accounts, is a really, really big question for me.
But I just sorry to kind of just
No, of course.
I just had a kind of counter question to that. I mean, obviously we hear about the penetration of Jan Dhan accounts. That the penetration number itself is fairly high. Now, out of that, obviously, one big criticism is that a lot of those accounts are inactive. But you're adding another layer to it, that it's not just about whether the accounts are there or whether they're inactive. It's also a question of access, be it from a smartphone, whether you have a smartphone, whether you have the signal to actually operate a digital device and access it, or whether the physical branch itself or the closest bank correspondent is so far that whether that's a viable proposition as well. Is there like a kind of a penetration or percentage number in terms of real bank account or financial inclusion footprint in India? Like, is there some kind of a quantified measure of it?
I mean, there are numbers which say like every fifth Jan Dhan account is active now.
Right.
There are lots of these numbers that keep coming up. There are questions of like how much failure on authentication Aadhaar has. So, I mean, I think that in my estimate, I would put the unbanked number much higher than whatever estimates the government is putting out. I think that 80% of all households have Jan Dhan.
Right.
I would think that people have the bank account, but I'm not sure what the value of it is outside on paper. And also like I said, it's cash is still pretty much king in India. It takes a long time to break. Having a bank account doesn't mean that it's used.
Mm-hmm.
Having a bank account doesn't mean that you are able to reach it also. So if it exists in some far-off bank branch, you may not even know about it. I have myself seen cases of people who had Jan Dhan accounts and their subsidies are coming into it,
right,
and they've been going into trying to figure out where their pensions are, because they didn't even know a Jan Dhan account has been opened and automatically linked to all their welfare payments. So,
right.
So I think it's a really complex problem.
So you're saying that the effective utilization is much lower than the 80%?
Yeah, I think utilization is much lower. I don't have the number on the top of my head, but World Bank puts out a report every couple of years called the Findex report, which usually has the usage number. I think that 1 in every 5 is inactive,
right,
like I said.
Right.
And I think that it's have you used your account in the last 1 month is the way to figure out whether it's active or not.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's if you're using the bank account to just pull out all the cash that comes into it once a month, I don't think that that's active in my definition also.
Yes.
So I think people cash out quite a bit, and all this like excitement around UPI and all these other payments that we are seeing in urban areas, I'm not sure how they've trickled down to other parts of the country.
And in an event like COVID, I mean, cash transfer is obviously one method. There's also like a balance that can be maintained between food and cash, right? I mean, they come with different logistical challenges, I guess. But how do you like address something like that? I mean, I totally agree, and we get the point, right? The rupees 500 number seems inadequate, and that quite rightly so. I mean, but how do you sort of supplement and bridge that gap with food? And is that a right way to think about it, to make like a blended food plus cash package in such times?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at any point, I think that the food subsidy should be strengthened and made available to a much larger number. I think that the right to food allows for between 65 to 70% of the population is entitled to PDS. So I think that it should. I think that approach is the right one, because what we, from what I understand, is that even if people get even if people get food subsidies, accessing it requires a little bit of cash, because it's a huge amount of drain on your time, drain on your resources, taking some kind of transport to get to the ration shop, going repeatedly. So even to better access government subsidized food, you need a little bit of cash. So there have been studies which show that if you give a cash transfer plus the food subsidy, then people use the food subsidy more.
Right.
Okay.
So I think I'm a big supporter of the PDS. I don't support any of the conversations that say that we should disband the PDS and give cash instead. I think given that India has this large infrastructure that we've built over the last few years, I think the question is how do we strengthen it? How do we make sure that it reaches who it's intended for, and not the question of let's disband it because it's inefficient. So I do think that the blended approach is good, but again, are people getting the ration that's meant for them? I've been reading reports of no ration card, no ration, but even though the government has said that you don't need these identifiers, and people who are unable to authenticate their Aadhars are not getting it. So there's tremendous amount of exclusion that's happening even on the ration side of it. From what I've been reading, I must confess that I have not been on the field, so I don't know this firsthand, but I've been reading very reliable reports especially by migrant workers, people who are studying migrant workers and also carrying out relief, that seem to suggest this. So
it's very interesting because financial inclusion has been a little bit of a theme in the last, let's call it 5-6 years. There's been massive push, right, and trying to bring in the rural into the formal market as well, and try to leave them aside and stop them from getting trapped into informal credit, and that's sort of been a theme. Do you think in terms of how that's evolving, and like you said earlier as well, tech plays an important role in that. Do you think we are tracking well in terms of a broader financial inclusion, and in terms of just bringing people into the system, and then you sort of go to the next layer of actually identifying on how to distribute it and where? But in terms of general trajectory of how financial inclusion is tracking with the help of tech and other logistics, do you think we're tracking well, or do you think there's a lot of inefficiencies still in there?
Look, I think that we've done well. I think that the kind of innovation and push that we've had in terms of creating this digital infrastructure has been commendable. Opening bank accounts, as somebody who has gone into villages and tried to open bank accounts for people who didn't have one, it's a really painful job. So I think that the government, both UPA 2, which started this effort, and then NDA 1 has done well to pick that up. But again, I think that any effort that the government makes needs to be, and unfortunately this is the burden of being the government, you have to be inclusive, and you have to make sure that the first citizen or whatever last mile person that you need to serve is being served. So it doesn't help if you have a fancy system that works for a few versus an inefficient system that works for many. I would in any case pick the inefficient system that works for many, which was the pre-digital system, which was the PDS, where you could go, you could negotiate with your ration shop owner, you could come back, you had some kind of ways of navigating and negotiating what was a corrupt system. So you may not get your full entitlement, you may get 40% of it, 50%. But here, because we are entirely beholden to the digital infrastructure, which if you get excluded from it, you're just out. I have seen people who have been unable to add their family members. They've wrongly removed and unable to get redressal for it. So it's complex, and also the ration shop owner who used to exercise some flexibility and is unable to help, because you get, say for instance, in a well-functioning ration shop, you have 100 people who are on the list. If one person gets dropped off, then he only gets ration for 99 people. So that one person who gets dropped off is out, and there's no way for them to find redressal, and that process is a long one.
Fair point.
It's one thing that I kind of noticed was that you're probably one of the very few people I've heard who have a positive take on the PDS, because I guess your idea is that that's an infrastructure is already there and it's a decentralized infrastructure to start with at the ground level. So might as well leverage upon that to the extent. Whereas the popular narrative is usually that it's inefficient, it is rife with corruption. But that's just a point that I want to make. But in addition to that, do you think like so far when it comes to this entire digital push, be it Jam, it's a very centralized push. It's pretty much top down from the government of India level all the way trickling. And I think during its progression, one could see that a lot of things are already being done at the state level, which are kind of overlaps of what the central government are announcing. So is it that we should kind of, let federalism take over in this, and so that, every state has its own unique solution and incentivize the state governments to implement it rather than, actually have a central push? Because I think at the ground level, people, especially, from an enforcement standpoint in India, they're not the most imaginative. Like you yourself mentioned that, even in order to get your benefit, the kind of ID you are keeping or the kind of document which you are keeping, you might be instructed that you don't need it, but when it comes to you actually negotiating with the guy at the local ground level, the person asks you for it. So those kind of unimaginative practices can probably be minimized a lot more if a federalistic state driven approach is taken. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so just going back to the point on the PDS, it depends on who you're talking to. I think a lot of us who worked on the field and have seen the PDS work and understood that it is responsible for about a third or a fourth of a household's monthly intake of food. It's very hard to then say wrap this up. We tried to, and I evaluated the digitization of the PDS, and a large majority of people in Chandigarh and Pondicherry, where this pilot was, seem to want the PDS back because there's a reliability of getting subsidized food, which is not there in cash. On this question of federalism, so even the PDS, the food procurement happens centrally. Mm-hmm. Those states are allowed to do their own procurement and use the public distribution system of the Ministry of Food and to deploy their own systems, their own ration quota as well. And I do believe, I think that it would be useful to take a more state-led approach. I think that, states like Kerala in this COVID-19 crisis have done immensely well and prioritized questions of food and nutrition while fighting the health pandemic as well. Right. Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Modi was a chief minister. I'm sure he recognizes how important it is that for states to make these decisions themselves. I've actually been in the planning commission where, then Chief Minister Modi was pushing for greater federalism. Right. So I have obviously been surprised by how centralizing a lot of his ideas have been. But I do think, and also because health is a state subject, right. So it's interesting because we have seen some states do much better in this crisis than others, right? Kerala obviously is a glimmering example, but also Maharashtra has done okay, Rajasthan has done all right. So you can see that the states that want to make a difference have been able to do so. So I do think that greater federalism is important. States have also been, because the central support has been quite restrained in terms of the money. I know that states have been adding to that kitties. So, for instance, in Telangana, the government is giving an additional 1,500 rupees to what everybody is getting is, I think, 2,000 rupees, which makes it far more meaningful. Right. And also the state is various states, including Karnataka, where I am, are adding additional rations, and which they do in the general PDS also. Like in Karnataka, you get dal, you get oil as part of your PDS. Other states give other things. Mm-hmm. So states do supplement the center's effort, and it's fine to do it in this partnership in my mind. I don't think it's an either or in an emergency crisis. I think it's everybody doing as much as they can approach. But I do think that greater decentralization in general is better for a federal structure like India's.
I mean, it's interesting because I think during a moment of crisis, like like the face of this crisis is obviously the central government, but everybody knows that the actual execution and the operationalization is happening at the state level, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that the government departments at the state level are much busier. So that kind of makes a lot of sense. Now, like there's another interesting angle, Astha, which has been thrown up in the sense that when we look at 500 rupees or 1,000 rupees or 2,000 rupees, that loosely that kind of a quote unquote helicopter money is somewhat of, I think, a much needed concept in India, because like generally there is a lack of social security here, right? Especially for the most marginalized parts of the country. There's no safety net for most people, right? Do you think that COVID is making that entire idea of helicopter money or UBI more mainstream within the Indian narrative? I know the way that's being done right now is not UBI. I understand that it's not really universal still. It's not fixed. It's not recurring. It's for a particular contingency. But just the idea that, it's, I mean, like in the West, the entire narrative of UBI was very much around, there's a rising risk of automation. So there'll be expectation of a job loss in the short to medium term. So it's good to have some sort of a universal basic income. I guess that was like a very prevalent, I mean, I might be generalizing here, but that was a prevalent narrative in the West. In India, obviously, the narrative has to be something quite different. But do you think UBI is becoming more and more, it kind of has got a stage or a platform because of COVID?
Yeah, I guess so. I think UBI keeps coming back into fashion every few years. I know that like a few years ago it was.
I appreciate your cynicism.
Yeah, I mean, it's just become one of those catch or free like ideas. Like there was a time when everyone was like blockchain. It's just that. Like
Blockchain
it just
what?
becomes.
Oh, okay, blockchain.
I just people. There was this time like 2 years ago where everyone was like the solution to all of the world's problems is blockchain. And UBI also, I think, like is suffering from it being a cool, catchy idea. So the big thing about universal basic income is it sufficient and is it affordable? And I think that the sufficiency and affordability don't always go hand in hand. My general perspective on universal basic income has been evolving. I think that in India right now, I think India does need better social security mechanisms. We don't have, things like unemployment benefits. We don't have health insurance. Large parts of our population is informal. Our pension architecture is extremely weak and limited. So I think that we definitely need to consider how to extend social security to a wider group of people. Even those who work in informal jobs, whether it's in rural areas as well as urban areas, and also the tech platform economy has also added to this informalization, whether it's your Zomato delivery workers or whether it's your Uber drivers. They're all part of this informal economy, which makes them particularly vulnerable to economic shocks like the one that we're living through right now. So there is a need to reimagine social security and also find ways in which the private sector and the government can work together to find coverage for a wider group of people. That said, is that social security likely to be UBI? I'm not sure. I don't think that one can replace one. To me, UBI only works as an additionality. It does not work as a supplement for existing systems. So I think that the objective should be, how do we universalize the PDS? How do we increase pensions from whatever they are, 200-300 rupees to something more meaningful? How do we expand them beyond just the elderly and widowed women? How do we give it to a much wider community of people? Because again, these systems exist. It's just a question of making them more robust, and how do we do that is something that we need to imagine. And also, why would we just collapse all of this infrastructure that we have. We need to find ways to use it. And like you said, India is extremely peculiar. The ideas of the rest of the world do not apply to us, and definitely not to all of us. And we need to be thinking about the most marginalized communities and trying to figure out how to reach them better, and not just building for the people living in the swanky parts of the country.
Yeah, and that's a logistical massive challenge, right? In terms of just segmenting the population out, in terms of trying to club in people who need it and who don't need it. Sort of that challenge. I mean, and that seems fairly ironic in the sense that it's universal at the end of the day, so it should be for everyone. But that's not how it is supposed to work, though, right? I mean, there has to be some kind of segmentation done across the population, which is kind of an biggest administrative challenge, right?
Yeah, so it's very it's hard. Targeting is expensive, and it's difficult. Definitely, I think that I theoretically subscribe to universalism because I feel like or even like a proxy universalism, you do it for about 80-85% of the population, because the rest of us will self-select. You and I will not stand in a ration shop. So I think that might be a way to. I understand that it's slightly more expensive. But there are also exclusion errors of leaving out people who deserve it and including people who don't deserve it, which may be solved for. So I haven't done the numbers on what it might. I think there were some numbers of like, if you extend the PDS to more people, how much would that cost? And I think that it's nominal because the infrastructure already exists.
Right.
So that would be my perspective on targeting versus universalism. Though I understand that this targeting and means testing is something that we need to do. I just think that errors creep in, but again, I mean, I can sit and pontificate, which is a nice place to be in. But
it's fascinating. Yeah, and I think there were, I remember reading a few, I don't know, sometime back about trying to explore an opt-out system in which everyone's put in default and then you opt out, and the wealthiest people are assumingly they will opt out and sort of, make it a little bit less stringent in terms of administrative logistics. But it's something like you said, right? You use the word like it keeps coming back into limelight for right reasons, wrong reasons. And such a time like this, COVID, it's probably the time when everyone talks about it because you're seeing the direct effects of it, right? Do you think like a lot of these discussions that are taking place right now will lose steam once we get over COVID and then sort of go back into a sluggish glacial space, or do you think we can still see some acceleration and the mindset is there to sort of get there fast in terms of just becoming more efficient in terms of all the initiatives on this front?
I don't know. I hope that a lot of people I read are reading it as a moment of rupture and opportunity that all of us should take to transform these systems, because I think what is clear is that there's glaring inequality. Our social security infrastructure is entirely broken. A lot of people are more vulnerable than we think they are. So I think that realization is a big one, and I suppose it takes an emergency to jolt everybody out of their minds to do something more meaningful. But at the same time, I also realize that as we emerge out of the health crisis, we're facing some of the worst economic crises that we've ever lived through. So the decisions on what needs to happen and how it might happen will be governed by that economic crisis. But again, I think that even in economic crises, one of the reasons that we were okay during the 2008-9 crises is because we had at the time created food and employment guarantees for a chunk of the population. So we must find ways to encourage that, and of course the state will be possibly the only people left with any money. So how can we deploy these sources to make sure that we are creating these safety nets for the vulnerable people is going to be important. I sure hope it's not a stopgap measure and leads to a more longer term imagination of support. But it'll have to be seen. Also, I mean, the whole problem is that we don't have a political movement that is lobbying for this. I think that, movements like Bernie Sanders, and I do call him a movement, is been critical to reimagining the relationship between workers and capital, thinking about pushing Uber and Lyft to recognize their workers as employees. We don't have movements, unfortunately, that are asking for greater social justice. And I think that's where India is going to suffer, because we just have not found leaders to articulate some of these things for us.
I mean, where I'm a bit hopeful this time is that there is usually, when it comes to problems like healthcare, or when it comes to problems like universal basic income, they are typically targeting long-term issues, right? And those issues are too long-term for the 5-yearly or 4-yearly political cycle. But in this crisis, what probably is different is there's an economic cost, which everyone can see, which companies can see, so I'm kind of hopeful that probably leaves some sort of a harder message, because I was reading lately that and no, why just reading lately in general, have you guys realized suddenly all the Ubers and the Zomatos and Swiggies are realizing their love for their quote unquote partners? Because those partners have disappeared, right? I mean, Uber announced, 25 crores of driver relief fund, which is nothing, which is just 3 days of the driver's monthly income. But I mean, a lot of these companies might be suddenly realizing that they might be tech platforms, but there is such a big operational element to their businesses. So might as well provide some sort of basic social security to the quote-unquote partners. Call them drivers, no need to call them partners, but at least provide that.
Yeah, well, Uber famously said that drivers were not central to their business. So, I hope that they're learning a little bit. But yeah, I think that then hopefully is a realization of that behind all the tech charm and tech magic, there's humans. As somebody on Twitter said, if all these tech companies were running without people, then why are they not making money right now? Which is true. So I think that maybe it leads to a realization. Maybe we push further into questions of greater automation and how do we remove people out of this equation altogether. I don't know. I do hope that, my only hope is that we as a community, both as users as well as people who work on platforms, start to organize a little bit better and start to put forward what the requirements are. So, I don't think it's fair for Zomato and Ola and whatever to start raising money from consumers. What have they been doing all of this while? Why don't they have systems to take care of their drivers? Why were they not prepared for these emergencies? So I think that they have a lot to answer for as well, particularly to their own staff and drivers.
But to be fair, the less business they do, the more money they save. That's how. Anyways, that's it. So that might also kind of that might act against this. Anyways, but any expectations, Astha, in terms of a second stimulus? We keep on reading about it. I think it was till last week there was a second stimulus which was supposed to come out, hasn't really come out yet. Anything that you feel might be in the pipeline?
I think there have been demands for increasing the cash support to people. Numbers as high as 5,000 to 7,000 rupees. So I'd like to see. I hope they realize the insufficiency of the amount that's been announced, and also. I guess the point that you made is to also see how much support they can give to states that are suffering. Gujarat, obviously being fairly wealthy, is not doing too well on the COVID numbers. Similarly with Maharashtra. So what kind of support can be given to these kinds of states? And I think just in terms of I think more than the stimulus, I want to see what the plan is for when the lockdown ends, what industries are going up, how are we managing that situation needs to be clarified as part of the stimulus also.
That's $1 million question.
That's exit strategy, something that everyone's trying to predict and assess, and will definitely analyze backward looking as well, which is obviously such a big challenge, right? I mean, no one knows, it's unprecedented. Just one more thing, like it's you talk about automation and sort of how that will impact jobs. I mean, we know that jobs are going to be lost like over the next 10-15 years as automation picks up. That there's a wide school of economic thought which believes that there'll be a lot of jobs created as well. The pattern, the nature of jobs will not be same. Like there'll be a shift in the kind of jobs that will be created, but there will be some kind of offsetting factor to that. But even that is not really well positioned to favor people who coming from less privileged backgrounds, right? I mean, that is sort of another angle to it which needs to be accelerated in terms of just uplifting the entire health and education ecosystem, right? It's a cascading effect, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you got to look at things from multiple directions and look at the pros and cons. So how, what are your views there in terms of, because, everyone just, there's automation is just thought of, it will come and just wipe out jobs, like robots will come and take away jobs, but there will be a lot of jobs created in the automation industry. There will be a lot of jobs created in the software programming and robotics, and there'll be more manufacturing. So is that sort of something that, as India, which is, how do we tackle something like that? Or is that something which is too far-fetched and not really substantiated as of now?
I mean, I think that it's happening at different levels already, and it's not just jobs in software it's not just cognitive jobs. There are also shit jobs that are being created, whether it's like AI labeling, India is a big player in right now. So it's just a question of I think that we need to get a hold of the situation, understand what's going to happen. Also, in all of this, I think that the role of the state is not to abdicate from its role to create jobs and provide well-being to people. So I would like to see how the government thinks about if jobs are indeed going to be lost. How do we regulate that, right? Or self-driving cars need to be regulated because there are jobs at the back of this. So first of all, we have to think about how do we regulate this automation better, and secondly, how do we think about creating jobs for those who might be out of jobs. So I think that maybe it might be a few years off for us, but those conversations need to start now. Now as in whenever this crisis is over.
Sure, yeah.
But I think I definitely think that we must also we should not just take it as a given that the robots are coming and they'll take our jobs. We need to also think about the implications of these robots. What jobs are they going to take? How do we regulate them? Those are also important questions.
Right, yeah. No, it makes sense. That's fair, yeah.
So cool. That was, I think, we are through around 45 minutes, and that was super interesting, Astha. Thanks a lot for your insights. And obviously, this is a moving target as we speak, and but we hope that there is a more, I would say, sustained and structural effort to fix these issues, not plain lip service. So on that note, it was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, it was a fascinating chat, and obviously learned something new, which always end up doing in podcasts. So that's a nice positive spillover effect for me personally. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me.
Great. So this is it for this episode. This is Nikhil Arora, and I have with me Sharad Chupran signing off.